Welcome back to Dom's Roundtable, my friends. After the incredible reception that my top 10 rarest armor sets in Shadow of the Erdtree received, you asked for the top 10 rarest weapons in the Elden Ring DLC, and I have delivered. In fact, there's actually so many new awesome hidden weapons in the DLC that it was really hard to narrow it down to just 10. So, if your favourite weapon that you consider rare, hidden or secret isn't here, shout at me in the comments and I will happily put together a part 2. Because I know there's already a bunch I would have loved to put in here that didn't quite make the cut of the top 10. And if you like the sound of that and you've already been enjoying the content on the channel, don't forget to subscribe. And without further ado, let's move on to weapon number 1, the Forked Tongue Hatchet. This one can be farmed in tandem with the Lizard Greatsword, which we'll be talking about second, but let's focus for the moment on this new hatchet. Firstly, it can be farmed from any imp that uses the Forked Tongue Hatchet, as you would imagine, of which there are actually very few, especially when compared to the amount of imps that use the new Lizard Greatsword. Obviously, you will always find imps in catacombs, so this is the only place you can farm this, and I strongly recommend right near the start of the Scorpion catacombs, as there are 1 or 2 axe wielders right by the Site of Grace. The weapon itself seems incredibly lackluster at first, however there are a few fairly hidden things you really need to know about this weapon, and it could become one of your favourites. Firstly, please note the weapon art that sprays the flames out in front of you is actually controlled with the direction of your camera. So if you practice and get good at rotating the camera in time with the movements, you can have all the flames spray out directly in front of you. Now, this sounds really cool on the surface, but even if you spec into this weapon, it doesn't do much damage. That is, until you find out that if you apply a buff such as Blood Flame, the Ash of War will then inflict bleed. So natively, this Ash of War does just do fire damage, it doesn't do bleed or anything like that. However, this is a very unique weapon. Even though you can't change the Ash of War or the affinity, it can be buffed with magic and consumables. So, as I say, apply something like Blood Flame, and that Ash of War now becomes 10 times better. This is a very interesting weapon, and one of only a few that falls in this category, where the affinity, and therefore the Ash of War, can't be changed. However, it's still a regular smithing stone weapon, and not a somber weapon, and also it can be buffed with magic and consumables. Meaning, with the right buffs, this can be far more devastating than it appears to be on the surface. Still, personally, I feel like this is quite a gimmicky weapon, and only one to add to your repertoire just so you can say, look, I finally got this hatchet to drop, and not really one you would use as your main weapon throughout a playthrough, but still pretty cool nonetheless. And next up, hand in hand with this, goes the Lizard Greatsword. This one can be farmed from pretty much any catacomb you want, because imps using this greatsword are everywhere. In fact, even though it has just as low of a drop rate as the Forked Tongue Hatchet, you will probably find just through naturally progressing through the game, you'll acquire 1 or 2 of these anyway, because you are killing so many imps using this weapon. Although, unfortunately, you can't do the pogo stick attack that the imps use against you when wielding this weapon, the charged R2 will spit the tongue out of the sword as a projectile towards your enemies. And yes, in case you were wondering, if you do infuse this with something like bleed, that projectile will also bleed your target. The fact that, unlike the hatchet, this can have its affinity changed, and it can have different Ashes of War put on it, means that this weapon is far more versatile, and actually a genuinely good weapon in the right hands and with the right build. This is a very fun weapon. I absolutely love the projectile from the charged R2. And it has been confirmed that both the weapon connecting with the enemy and the projectile being spat out of the end count as 2 different hits, meaning you will deal twice the amount of status builder. This could go crazy with the likes of bleed, poison or frost. Hopefully this is intended and not a bug. I feel like it probably is, because other similar weapons that produce an effect and also have a swing or a slash also hit twice. So I imagine this is intended, and if so, that makes this weapon even cooler. Next up, let's take a look at the Curse Blades Cirque. This is one of the new backhand blade weapon types, and unfortunately, in my opinion, the worst of the 3. Don't get me wrong, it looks really, really cool. It's incredibly fun to use. I really like that the charged heavy attack throws the weapons at your enemies. However, this isn't incredibly unique because loads of the weapons in the DLC do this. Arguably, the best thing about this weapon is its Ash of War Deadly Dance, which does look really, really cool and is surprisingly good at interrupting enemies' attacks, even the heavily armored Black Knights here. Unfortunately, because its Ash of War and affinity cannot be changed, it actually has the most lackluster damage output and bleed buildup of all of the backhand blades. All three of them can be significantly more powerful than this when tailored to your build, and obviously the others are much more versatile because they can be infused with Ashes of War, and therefore you can change their affinity. So though this is a very cool looking weapon, it's very fun to use, mechanically and gameplay wise, it's actually pretty terrible. If you want to farm it along with the rest of the Curse Blade aesthetic set, you can, because it looks very, very, very cool. And if you did want to, probably the two easiest Curse Blade enemies to kill is either the one directly in front of you when you first spawn into the DLC, or the one right at the top of Belurat Tower Settlement at the Site of Grace right outside of the Divine Beast Dancing Lions arena. However, even though this is a really stylish weapon, and is definitely a cool thing to say you have, I can't imagine you would ever be using this. So my advice is grind out the armor set, and if you don't happen to have the weapon drop during your attempts, just leave it, or maybe ask if someone else can drop it for you in my Discord server, if you really want it that badly. Next up, we shall be taking a look at one of the new best weapons in the DLC. Such a sleeper hit, a genuinely incredible weapon. This is the Fire Knight's Greatsword. This is effectively just a straight up upgrade from the Zweihander. Genuinely, this greatsword is ridiculously powerful. I'm not going to pretend to know all of the ins and outs of exactly how to get the most efficiency out of this weapon yet, but truly the stats and the moveset of this weapon make it one of the best colossal swords in the game, period. It is just so insanely good. It shares the best of various different movesets from other colossal swords, making this even devastating in PvP because some of these swing timings are really challenging for less experienced players to get down. And exactly as the flavor text states, this is a long, slender blade that undulates like fire, blessed with a flame incantation, and further flame imbuement will amplify the effect and greatly increase the armament's power. Now, this was bugged and it actually applied to holy infusions rather than fire infusions. However, don't let people tell you this is still the case. This has been fixed and it is greatly impacted now by fire infusions. As you've probably guessed, this is farmed from all of the Fire Knights that use the Greatsword, of which there is loads in the Specimen Storehouse. And as this is one of the biggest and most confusing areas in the game, you will probably naturally acquire a few of these Greatswords as you are going up and down, trying to find all of the hidden things you inevitably missed the first 68 times you went through this area. And if you somehow are unlucky enough to not have one through naturally playing through this area, please do grind out for it. It is absolutely insane. And once you've got one, go check out a build so that you can see how to min-max this and make the most out of the weapon. Hopefully I will have one released for you soon. I don't know if anyone else has any up yet, I honestly haven't checked, but as it's such a popular weapon, I imagine there is a dozen of them already. And one last thing about this incredible weapon before we move on, to head up anyone who may try and tell you or me that this weapon isn't actually all that good, please note it is true this weapon was nerfed. However, that's just because it was bugged and it was genuinely game-breakingly overpowered. Now it's just one of the best weapons in the game. I will leave it there and I will let you have your fun with the Greatsword as we move in to weapon number 5. Weapon number 5 is, in my opinion, the new best Great Spear in the game. Okay, maybe that's a bit of a reach. You would kind of have to forget about the fact that Messmer's Ash of War and Mogwin's Sacred Spear's Ash of War are both absolutely ridiculously insane. But let me talk about why the Messmer Soldier's Spear is such an underrated sleeper hit. Firstly, this is a very easily farmable spear. It drops from any Mesmer soldier that is spear wielding. This is best farmed just northwest of the Morth ruins. There are 3 spear wielding soldiers here that you can very easily kill about 5 or 6 times before your Silverhorn tender runs out. Once you've acquired this weapon, one of the things that makes it so powerful is the moveset that it shares with only one other great spear in the game. I'm talking about the charged heavy attack which it shares with the tree spear. However, there is one more unique thing about the Mesmer Soldier Spear which makes it even better than that. So firstly, talking about the charged heavy attack, as it states in the flavor text, being made for overwhelming onslaughts, attacks with this weapon can be charged to unleash consecutive strikes. So 2 fully charged R2s will actually attack 4 times instead of twice, meaning with statuses, this weapon is incredibly good at building up different debuffs and negative effects on your enemies. I have managed to get the blood loss build-up on this weapon to 140, and I'm going to be dealing this 4 times throughout a charged R2 combo, meaning one combo will instantly bleed almost every single enemy in the game. And now we come to the second reason why this is even better than just having the moveset of the tree spear. If you take a look at the damage type of, I believe, every single other great spear in the game, they are all simply pierce damage, which as we know is absolutely trash against certain enemies. However, the Mesmer Soldier Spear does standard pierce. So certain attacks, certain moves will actually deal standard damage, bypassing the negative of being a pure pierce weapon. Combine this with the fact that you can hide behind your shield and poke enemies as well, you really have got everything you need in a build, all packaged in one amazing common rarity weapon, albeit with quite a low drop rate. Play around with this and I truly think it could become one of your favourite weapons. It is absolutely insane in certain builds. Next up we have got the Milady, one of the new light greatsword weapon types, and I believe the only one that can be infused with different affinities and different ashes of war, arguably making it the most powerful light greatsword in the game, because by tailoring the affinity you are going to absolutely maximize the value and the damage of this weapon. Obviously, as we all know from the various trailers and preview events, the Ash of War wing stance was designed to be used specifically with this weapon and no other weapon in the entire game. So of course this is probably the one you are going to want to go for, especially because it looks so damn cool. And it isn't just a gimmick, it is surprisingly powerful, allowing me to 2-shot Black Knights with the correct build. And this one, unlike the rest of the weapons so far on this list, you'll be happy to know isn't a rare drop. This is actually from a chest up the top of this tower as you're progressing into Castle Ensis. Another thing that makes this weapon so damn good is, if you didn't know, with light greatswords you can mix and match light and heavy attacks at will, creating a nearly endless cycle of various different combos and attacks. I'd be really interested to know what everyone's favourite combo of light and heavy attacks is, almost like figuring out the best attack pattern on Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. What is the most efficient DPS wise? What's going to give PvP players the most trouble, because there's so many different flowy moves and combos that you can spam with this sword to keep your opponents on their toes, because it just seems so random until you really get to grips with the moveset. Very awesome weapon, looks super cool, and I personally slept on it for most of my first playthrough. Definitely wish I'd used it more. Incredible for many different reasons. Next up is one of my absolute favourite weapons on this list. This is the Sword of Light and Darkness. There are 3 stone altars you will find throughout the game. One of them is in the castle watering hole, which is at the bottom of Shadow Keep once you have gone down the coffin. Another is right at the end of the Fog Rift catacombs in a hidden room, and this is probably the first one you will encounter. And the final one is in Upper Ra, at the end of an invisible bridge. Whichever of these altars you encounter first, most likely the Fog Rift catacombs as it's right at the start of the game, you will receive a sword trapped in its stone scabbard, unable to be removed. However, if you then visit one of the other 2 altars mentioned, you can raise this sword to the light or raise this sword to the dark, and it will become the Sword of Light or the Sword of Dark. And both versions of this sword have a very unique ability. The Sword of Darkness will deal holy damage and also temporarily reduce holy damage negation in the surrounding area. However, the Sword of Light will not only deal holy damage, but for a period of time it will also increase the damage of your other holy abilities. And to add to this very unique sword, you may change between the Sword of Light and the Sword of Darkness as many times as you want. You are not stuck with whichever one you choose first. And finally, it will even retain its upgrade level. So if you get the Sword of Light to +10 and then decide to transform it into the Sword of Darkness, it will still be a +10 sword, making this weapon very versatile and usable in many different builds. Another thing I will say when it comes to the actual use of this weapon is the huge difference in the Ash of War from the Sword of Darkness in comparison with the Sword of Light. Now, as you can see, the Sword of Darkness can do tremendous amounts more damage, and it is also much more consistent because it does one full ring around your character. However, you leave yourself very, very vulnerable because the wind-up on this attack is so long. And specifically, whilst trying to demo on these rot zombies in Caelid, off camera I got grabbed by them like 5 or 6 times before I managed to pull off this Ash of War just once. The Sword of Light, however, the Ash of War, really quick, really consistent, and as you can see, because it shoots out loads and loads and loads of little rays of light in front of you, this is going to be insanely good against really big targets where very few of them rays miss. So I would say Sword of Light for big single targets and Sword of Dark for groups of enemies. The next weapon we'll take a look at is the Golem Fist. This has a small percentage chance to drop from certain golems in Telu's Ruined Forge, the first one being on the left side of the pillar bridge in the alcove, the second petting the lava slime on the right of the pillar, and the last across from the lever, also petting a slime. You'll know which 3 I'm talking about because if you engage any of them in ranged combat, they are almost definitely going to launch their fists at you. That's exactly what this weapon does. That's the way you know you're fighting the correct ones. And that takes me on to one of the reasons you may use this weapon. As they are carved with Smith script, this enables the strong attacks to launch the entire fist straight ahead. This unfortunately is a bit of a gimmick and not that great when put into practice. As you can see here, I'm fighting some very low level blood fiends and mesmer soldiers, and it really isn't doing all that much damage to them. And I have got this at +24, specifically infused with fire because my main stat is faith. I've got 60 strength and 90 faith at the moment, so in theory most of my weapons that use this scaling are going to be doing thousands of damage with a charged R2, and this is barely doing a couple of hundred. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong, if there's a different build that would make the damage output better, but it feels like the charged R2 and launching your fists at your enemies is very, very lackluster in comparison to just punching them to death with these weapons. Also bearing in mind, as this is a charged attack, I do have the charged attack boosting mixed physic on, and I do have the Smith script enhancing talisman on as well. So everything I could possibly do to increase the power of these fists, and they aren't doing all that much. However, if I simply run up and punch the enemies, they are getting melted. So it's a really cool, really fun gimmick. They're a great looking fist weapon, but their only unique quality, unless I'm doing something drastically wrong, is just bad. And judging by various forums and comments, it ain't me, it's the weapon. Next up is the Euphoria. This is one of 2 new twin blades in the DLC, and most probably the best twin blade in the game by an absolute country mile. It is very, very hard to use because of how much you need to hit with this weapon, and thank God that someone has done the maths so I can explain it to you without having to spend hours trying to figure it out myself. So, basically, the reason this weapon is so insanely good is its Ash of War Euphoria Vortex. With this, you will violently twirl the armament in front of you, dealing multiple slashes directly ahead. And the greater the luster of the blades, the greater the power of this skill. However, using this skill will fully consume the blade's luster. You may be thinking, what the fuck does all of that mean? Well, let me explain. The Euphoria has a charging mechanic based on dealing a number of hits in quick succession. So, after 7 hits within a 10-second window, it will gain a 5% damage buff, which will also empower your Ash of War to fire holy bolts forward in the direction that you're facing, in addition to its base effect. And if you keep hitting, you can basically hit tier 2 of this upgrade, meaning your weapon attacks are going to start dealing even more damage, and the weapon skill will last longer, dealing increased overall damage and shooting out twice as many holy bolts before finishing. And if one slash of the weapon hits 2 or 3 enemies, this counts as multiple hits. So it's far easier to build up this buff when hitting multiple targets. This is one of the most complex and difficult to use weapons in the game, but could easily be one of the most powerful if left unchecked. And now, as for how to find and reach the weapon, this can be really hard, confusing, and just deadly because of the amount of times you could fall to your death on the way. So running back down the stairs where you've got the 2 priests spamming the spiral spells at you, come underneath into this room, and out the other side you can very carefully jump off and then start to proceed your very long journey all the way back down to the bottom of the tower. There's a few very spicy moments, one where you have to jump through this window, and it's very easy to accidentally kill yourself here. And then after you've taken down a lift or 2 and you are right at the bottom, you will have to take out a Divine Beast Warrior. And finally, behind him, down another lift, through this door, you will find the Euphoria. One of the toughest weapons in the DLC to acquire, but well worth the effort. And now we come to the Claws of Night, dropped by the NPC invader Sword Hand of Night Anna, found in the Finger Ruins of Mir, which are underneath the Cathedral of Manus Metra. This area can only be accessed as you are progressing Count Ymir's questline. This is a very stylish weapon for sure, though as far as claws go, it doesn't really have anything special in the moveset. The damage isn't crazy, the bleed isn't crazy. However, Scattershot Throw, the Ash of War, which can be chained twice, inflicts insane amounts of bleed buildup, especially when used against really big targets, allowing most of the projectiles to hit. As you can see against the big giants, the big dogs, the big birds, it will melt through any big target susceptible to bleed. Aside from that though, and how cool it looks, it's probably one of the more lackluster weapons on this list. And if you were using this video as a sounding board for your new favourite weapon, then I would stick to something like the Mesmer Soldier's Spear, the Fire Knight's Greatsword, or the Euphoria. They're probably the top 3 for me. However, regardless of how many weapons on this list you like, you now know the top 10 rarest weapons in the DLC. Let me know if you have any more suggestions for other rare weapons I've missed down below. And if people want it, I will happily make a part 2. And with that, my friends, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.